They cut me from the quarterly strategy meeting without a word. 12 years of leading million-dollar projects erased in an instant. And suddenly, I was watching my replacement stumble through my presentation from behind a glass wall. What they didn't know was that I'd left every critical piece of that plan locked behind systems only I could control. And one wrong move from him could cost the company millions. And I was the only one who could stop it. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from? Hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this unfolds. I walked into the office that morning expecting the usual rush before the quarterly strategy meeting, the one I'd helped lead for over a decade. My inbox should have been full of last-minute data pulls, budget summaries, and executive questions. Instead, it was silent. Too silent. A quick glance at the conference schedule told me everything. My name wasn't there. In my place, under Director of Strategic Operations, was Mark Ellison, the man they'd parachuted in just 2 months ago. No conversation, no explanation, not even a courtesy email. I felt the sting in my chest, but I kept moving, my face calm as I passed by the glass-walled boardroom. Inside, I watched Mark shuffle papers like they were foreign objects, fumbling with the presentation clicker. I recognized the slides immediately. They were mine, built from weeks of research, analysis, and late nights. But I also recognized what wasn't there. I had left out the key integration model, the one that linked all the moving parts into something functional. Without it, those slides were nothing but a collection of disconnected talking points. My absence wasn't a mistake. It was a choice they had made, and it was going to cost them. I stood there, just outside the line of sight, observing the subtle panic ripple through the room as questions came, and Mark's answers landed flat. I didn't rush in to save him. I didn't text anyone a fix. I simply took mental notes, not just on what was missing from the meeting, but on who in that room was shifting uncomfortably in their chairs, whose eyes flicked toward the door as if they expected me to appear. They'd made a move to sideline me, but they had underestimated just how deeply my influence ran. A title might be printed on the agenda, but the true authority lived in the systems, relationships, and decisions that still ran through me. And now I had every reason to use that to my advantage. I didn't confront anyone. No HR complaint, no hallway confrontation, no bitter email to the executive team. Instead, I sat at my desk and began mapping the real flow of power in the company. Titles looked impressive on an org chart, but titles didn't sign off on budget reallocations, approve vendor contracts, or green-light project extensions. People did. And most of those people had been working with me for years. They trusted my judgment because I had saved their projects, fixed their numbers, and made sure their deliverables landed on time. Mark might have been given my seat at the table, but he didn't know where the levers were. I spent that day tracing every approval process, every chain of communication, every point where a decision passed through someone I knew personally. The patterns emerged quickly. Finance called me before locking numbers. Legal asked me for context before finalizing agreements. Operations confirmed my timelines before committing resources. All it would take was a few well-placed, helpful adjustments, and the company would still run through me, whether Mark liked it or not. I wasn't looking for a messy fight. I was building something cleaner, a shift in perception so subtle that by the time anyone realized what was happening, it would be irreversible. My goal wasn't to embarrass him in a single dramatic moment. My goal was to make him irrelevant, to strip away the illusion of his authority piece by piece until there was nothing left but a hollow title on a door. The best part was I didn't have to force anything. The machine was already built. I had designed half of it. All I had to do now was reroute the power lines, one approval at a time, and wait for the lights in his office to start flickering. The first move was small enough that no one could accuse me of undermining anything. A request came in from the finance controller to release funds for a client rollout Mark had been bragging about since the day he arrived. I replied with a polite, "Hold on that until final model approval comes through." The final model, of course, was sitting on my secure drive, incomplete without a series of updates only I could provide. It wasn't malicious, I was simply ensuring compliance. But it meant every purchase order, every vendor contract, and every travel arrangement tied to that project froze in place. Within days, I began hearing the ripple effects. Calls from project managers asking why vendors were getting restless, emails from operations leads wondering about resourcing delays. I responded the same way each time, calm, professional, and reassuring, as if I was the one keeping chaos at bay. What no one noticed was that every conversation ended with them taking direction from me, not Mark. The more he pushed to get things moving, the more people came to me for clarification. By the end of the second week, I had reestablished myself as the central node for all critical approvals. Mark was still signing documents, but those documents only reached his desk after I had already set the terms. He was essentially rubber stamping my decisions without realizing it. I kept it subtle, never refusing outright, never leaving a paper trail that showed I was blocking him. It was all about framing things as temporary pauses, additional verifications, or cross-departmental checks. In corporate culture, no one questions a delay framed as risk management, especially when it's coming from someone with my track record. Every pause I created gave me more leverage, more proof that my oversight was indispensable. Mark still had the title, the paycheck, and the corner office, but he was now the last person to know when something changed, not the first. And in a company like ours, that was the same as losing the war before realizing there was even a battle. What started as a small tap on the brakes was turning into a full stop, and Mark was sitting in the driver's seat with no idea the engine had been quietly removed. If closing the tap slowed him down, cutting off his view of the road would make sure he never found his footing again. I began with the project update emails, subtle adjustments to the recipient list, so his name quietly dropped off threads that mattered. Not all at once, just enough so that he'd miss the initial context and end up chasing details after decisions had already been made. When questions came up in meetings, he'd hesitate, trying to recall updates he'd never actually received. I kept my expression neutral, stepping in with the answers before anyone had time to notice the gap. It was never framed as, "Mark doesn't know." It was, "Karen has the latest numbers." And the more it happened, the more people defaulted to me before even thinking to loop him in. Then came the attachments, critical documents sent out missing one or two key pages, the kind that changed entire timelines or shifted deliverables. When Mark eventually got them, the deadlines were already too tight to make adjustments without causing more delays. I made sure the missing pieces always came to me first, under the guise of double-checking for errors. So by the time they reached his desk, the moment to act had already passed. I wasn't sabotaging the company. I was streamlining it, keeping things on track in spite of him. Or at least, that's what it looked like to everyone else. His assistant became my unintentional ally, forwarding me questions he didn't have the bandwidth or the answers to handle. Every time I solved a problem before it hit his calendar, I became the point of contact people trusted. The shift was gradual but unmistakable. In conversations, Mark's role faded from decision maker to person who needs to be informed. And in our world, that's just another way of saying irrelevant. I tracked the moments when his influence slipped, clients bypassing him to call me directly, department heads sending me drafts for approval without mentioning his name, even junior analysts noting per Karen's direction in their reports. He still believed he was steering the ship, but from my vantage point, I could see him slowly drifting out to sea, disconnected from the map, the compass, and the crew. By the time he noticed he was out of the loop no longer existed around him. It had closed tightly, and I was the one holding the knot. The first real crack in Mark's image appeared during a mid-month operations review with the executive team. He'd come in with what he thought was a polished progress report, complete with charts and forecasts. But I had made sure the data feeding those charts came from the outdated metrics he'd been clinging to. Figures I'd quietly replaced weeks ago in the master file everyone else was using. As he clicked through the slides, the CFO frowned, then interrupted to point out that his projections didn't match the numbers finance had. Mark stumbled, scrolling back and forth trying to reconcile numbers that were never going to align. I kept my gaze fixed on my notepad, letting the silence hang just long enough before offering, "I have the updated file if it would help." The relief in the room was almost audible, and within minutes, my version was on the screen, discussion back on track. No one said it outright, but the damage was done. The executives had seen him flounder while I stepped in with precision. Over the next few weeks, similar moments followed. Mark presenting client updates missing key changes, proposing timelines that clashed with locked vendor schedules, pitching strategies already vetoed in earlier planning calls he hadn't attended. Every mistake was public, every correction subtle but clear. I never challenged him directly. I simply filled the gaps he left wide open. It didn't take long before the executives stopped asking him questions altogether, turning to me instead. In their eyes, Mark wasn't leading. He was being carried. And in a place where perception is everything, that was the beginning of the end for him. Mark's desperation to prove himself finally boiled over when he announced a full-scale leadership summit, inviting executives, department heads, and key clients for a day of strategic alignment. It was his stage, his moment to reclaim authority, and he treated it like a personal victory lap. I stayed quiet, offering only minimal support, positioned as a background coordinator rather than a key participant. But while he rehearsed his keynote and polished his talking points, I made one small but decisive adjustment. The live analytics dashboard he planned to showcase would require my master password to update in real time. Without it, the graphs would freeze on whatever baseline data was loaded at the start, data that was incomplete and months out of date. The morning of the summit, Mark strode onto the stage with the confidence of a man who believed the room belonged to him. The first few slides drew polite nods, but when he reached the dashboard, the numbers on the massive screen refused to refresh. He tapped the clicker, frowned, tried again, and then glanced toward the tech team in the back. They shifted uncomfortably, glancing at me. The pause stretched long enough for murmurs to ripple through the crowd. Finally, one of the executives asked, "Karen, can you get this working?" I rose slowly, walked to the podium, and without looking at Mark, typed in my password. The dashboard instantly came alive, charts spinning into current figures. The room leaned forward, eyes on me, not him. I handed the clicker back with a polite nod and returned to my seat, but the damage was irreversible. Everyone had seen the truth in real time. Without me, the presentation, and by extension the company's strategy, didn't function. Mark finished his speech, but the applause was thin, scattered, the kind reserved for someone who had been publicly unmasked. 2 weeks after the summit, an all-staff email went out from HR announcing that Mark Ellison was pursuing new opportunities outside the company. No farewell party, no speeches, not even a thank you post on the internal bulletin board. His nameplate vanished from the corner office by the next morning, replaced with a simple, vacant sign. There was no public discussion of why he left, but everyone already knew. The leadership had seen him lose control piece by piece, until there was nothing left for him to manage. I didn't inherit his title, and I didn't want it. Instead, the CEO called me into his office and offered something better, a custom role, Director of Strategic Operations, reporting directly to him with authority that bypassed the usual chain of command. It wasn't a promotion in name alone, it was a complete shift in power, one that recognized where the real decision-making already lived. I accepted without hesitation. By the time Mark's LinkedIn quietly updated to consultant, the company was running more smoothly than it had in years, and my position at the center of it was no longer an open secret. It was policy. Looking back, I never needed to shout, threaten, or stage a dramatic showdown to win. Titles can be handed out overnight, but real power is built quietly, one decision and one relationship at a time. By redirecting the flow of approvals, information, and trust, I didn't just survive being sidelined, I made myself impossible to replace. Mark's downfall wasn't the result of one humiliating moment. It was the accumulation of every gap he couldn't fill because I'd already stepped into it. In corporate politics, the person who controls the flow of truth controls the outcome, and no business card can compete with that. Now, I walk into the office knowing I don't need a title to protect my place. I have something stronger. And for anyone who's been underestimated, remember, you don't have to fight for the throne if you already control the crown. They thought stripping my title would erase me. But all it did was give me the perfect cover to take back every ounce of influence they tried to steal. I didn't shout, I didn't threaten. I simply redirected the flow of power until my rival stood in a corner. He couldn't escape. In life, and especially in the corporate world, power doesn't always live where the titles are printed. It lives in relationships, in the trust of colleagues, in knowing where the information flows and how to guide it. My story wasn't about a dramatic public takedown. It was about precision, patience, and using the system's own design to my advantage. I learned that silence can be a weapon, and that you don't always need to fight in the open to win. Instead of burning bridges, I strengthened the ones that mattered, ensuring that when the time came, I wasn't just an option, I was the only option. The lesson here is simple. If someone tries to push you out, don't waste energy on their stage. Build your own, quietly, until they realize the spotlight has shifted. Victory doesn't always mean taking someone's place. It can mean making their role irrelevant. Revenge can be clean, professional, and still deliver justice without leaving you covered in the mess. How to get started today. 1. Identify the people and processes that rely on you the most. Protect those connections. 2. Pay attention to where information originates and where it bottlenecks. 3. Make yourself the go-to problem solver without advertising it. 4. Stay calm and avoid open conflict. Let results speak louder than reaction. If you've ever faced someone trying to erase your value, tell me in the comments how you fought back. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that quiet strength can change everything. And subscribe for more stories of grit, strategy, and winning on your own terms.